I got angry with my family because they don't invite me to family vacations. Am I wrong? Hi guys. My family recently booked a vacation and asked me if I wanted to go. I said I couldn't afford it, and that was the end of it. Recently, I was talking to my mom and she told me that my two younger siblings are each bringing a friend and she's paying for everything. My brother is 20 years old, lives at home, and she's paying for both him and a friend. And my sister and her friend are going on an all-inclusive vacation to Spain. The same thing happened last year. Everyone went on vacation without me, but last year they didn't bring anyone else. I didn't mind until I heard that my mom is paying for other kids to go but not taking me, so now I'm upset with her. I also do a lot for her, way more than my other siblings. I live 10 minutes away, so I always drive her, pick her up from school, or do things around the house for her. But I feel bad because she clearly had this extra money to spend on taking other people's kids on vacation but not me. This situation made me think about all the times I felt like I don't get the same treatment as my siblings. It's not just about the vacation but also about how she treats me in general. Whenever they need something, she's there for them without hesitation, whereas she often tells me that I'm already an adult and should take care of my own problems. I understand that I'm not a child anymore, but it's frustrating to see my siblings get everything effortlessly while I have to struggle for every little thing. I tried talking to my mom about it, but she gave me excuses. She said she thought I didn't want to go or couldn't afford it, so she didn't offer to help me. However, I find that hard to believe when I see she has enough money to pay for my siblings' friends. Why didn't she at least offer me a portion of that money so I could join them? After that conversation, I started distancing myself a little from her. It's not that I don't love her, but I feel like I need to protect myself emotionally. It hurts to feel like I'm not as important as my siblings and that I'm always left out. I try to convince myself that maybe I'm overreacting, but every time I think about it, I realize I'm not. Actions speak louder than words, and her actions show me that I'm not her priority. The vacation issue is just one part of the problem. When I was younger, I also noticed differences in treatment. My siblings got more expensive Christmas gifts, they were given money to go out with friends while I was told to save. Even when I went to university, I had to work part-time to pay for my expenses, while my mom covered my brother's without hesitation. Talking to a friend about this, she told me that maybe my mom just sees me as independent and responsible, which is why she doesn't feel the need to help me as much as she helps my siblings. But to me, it's not just about independence, it's about feeling like I'm part of the family too. I put in a lot of effort to help, to be present, and I don't feel like that is appreciated. In the last few days, I've been thinking about setting some boundaries. I don't want to be the person who is always available to help when she needs me, if, when I need her, I can't count on her. It's not about revenge, it's about learning to take care of myself and not letting myself be emotionally hurt anymore. I still don't know what to do about the vacation. Part of me wants to confront her again and directly ask why she excludes me like this. But I'm also afraid that she'll just deny it again and I'll end up feeling even worse. Maybe I should just focus on building my own life without relying on her approval or affection. What hurts me the most is that, despite all of this, I still want to be included. I still wish that one day she would call me and say, "I've booked a vacation and I want you to come with me." But part of me knows that will probably never happen. The distance I started putting between my mother and me wasn't intentional at first. I just needed space to process what I was feeling, but with each day that passed without an honest conversation between us, the gap grew wider. It wasn't easy to accept that, no matter how much I tried to justify her attitude, the reality remained the same. I wasn't her priority. My siblings seemed indifferent to the situation. To them, this vacation was just another trip, a well-deserved gift they received without question. They didn't notice my absence, or if they did, they didn't seem to care enough to mention it. Sometimes I wondered if I was the one overreacting, if maybe I should just accept the situation without overthinking it. But every time I tried, the feeling of injustice came back even stronger. One random afternoon, my best friend Clara came to visit me. We talked about many things before. Inevitably, the topic of my family came up. After listening to me vent my frustrations, she leaned forward and said something that stuck with me. "You don't need their validation to live your life. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what you want without waiting for them to include you." It was a thought I had never fully considered. I had always been trapped in the idea that, somehow, eventually, my mother would notice the difference in treatment and do something about it. But what if it never happened? What if waiting was only hurting me more? I decided to take some time to focus on myself. I signed up for a course I had been postponing for years, went out more with friends, and tried to fill my days with activities that made me feel good. But still, every time my phone rang and I saw my mother's name on the screen, a feeling of uncertainty took over me. Finally, one day she called to ask for a favor. It wasn't an emotional conversation or an apology, just a routine request. She needed me to take her to the supermarket because her car was in the shop. During the drive, I tried to keep the conversation light, but inside, I was fighting an ongoing battle between the desire to tell her how I felt and the fear that her answers would only hurt me more. I couldn't help it. In the parking lot, before she got out of the car, I blurted out the question that had been on my mind for days. "Why didn't you offer to take me on vacation with you?" She seemed surprised, as if she didn't understand why this was still important to me. "I thought you didn't want to go," she replied, in a tone that sounded indifferent to me. That was the moment I realized I would never get the answer I wanted. Not because there wasn't one, but because my mother simply didn't see things the way I did. To her, her decision made sense. To me, it didn't. Weeks passed, and the day of their trip arrived. While they packed their bags and prepared to fly off to a sunny, exotic destination, I decided to do something different. I bought a ticket for my own trip, one I hadn't planned but now felt necessary. It wasn't a luxurious or extravagant destination, but it was a place I had always wanted to visit. Trip helped me reflect. I couldn't change my family or force them to see me the way I wanted to be seen, but I could change how I reacted to it. I was no longer going to wait to be included, nor was I going to keep questioning whether I was important enough to them. Instead, I would start focusing on being important to myself. But despite everything, a part of me knew that my story with my mother wasn't over. There were still many things left unsaid, many wounds that, although they no longer bled, still hurt. And sooner or later, I would have to decide whether I wanted to keep fighting for her attention or if, finally, it was time to let her go. The trip I took on my own was a revealing experience. Not just because I physically distanced myself from everything that reminded me of my situation with my family, but also because I gave myself the time to think about how I wanted to handle my life from now on. First, I felt a strange mix of freedom and sadness. On one hand, I enjoyed the independence of deciding every detail of my day without worrying about others' expectations. On the other, the fact that no one in my family had called or messaged me to ask how I was doing reinforced the sense of detachment I had already been carrying for a while. During my days in this new environment, I met several people who, without knowing it, helped me see things from a different perspective. Among them was Sophia, an older woman who had been traveling alone for over 20 years. We met in a small cafe while waiting for the rain to stop so we could continue with our plans. Conversation flowed naturally, and at some point I mentioned my family situation. Sometimes people don't give us what we need, not because they don't want to, but because they simply don't know how to, she said as she stirred her tea. But that doesn't mean you have to keep waiting. You can give yourself what others don't offer you. Her words echoed in my mind for days. It was true, I had spent so much time waiting for my mother to change, to see me the way I wanted, that I hadn't realized that maybe it would never happen. Maybe the key wasn't to keep seeking her approval, but to learn to live without it. When I returned home, everything was the same. My family had already come back from their vacation, and from what I could see on social media, it had been a wonderful trip for them. No one mentioned my absence, not even out of curiosity. It was as if they had never expected me to be part of it in the first place. Despite everything, I tried to stay firm in my decision not to rely on their recognition. I signed up for a new work project, resumed old hobbies I had set aside, and started dedicating more time to friendships that truly valued my presence. However, as the days passed, I noticed a small change in my mother's attitude. She began calling me more often, though her reasons remained practical. She needed help with something, had an errand to run, or simply wanted me to accompany her somewhere. First, I responded as I always had, but then I realized that I also had the right to set boundaries. I didn't have to be available all the time just because she asked. The first time I said, "I can't, I have other plans," her reaction was one of surprise. She remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Well, okay," in a tone I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe she hadn't expected me to start prioritizing myself. My brother noticed the change too. At a family gathering, he casually mentioned how I wasn't as available to help around the house anymore. He said it with a smile, but I sensed a hint of annoyance in his words. That's when I realized that, in some way, my role within the family had been that of the reliable one, the person who was always there when others needed her. And now that I had stepped away from that role, the difference was noticeable. But despite my determination to move forward, there was something inside me that I still couldn't completely let go of. Maybe it was the hope that, at some point, my mother would realize what I had been feeling all this time. Or maybe it was just the habit of wanting to belong to a place that, no matter how hard I tried, never truly felt like mine. I couldn't deny that the change made me feel stronger, more in control of my life. But it also left me with an uncertainty I didn't know how to resolve. How far was I willing to go with this distance? Was this just a way to protect myself, or was I really breaking the bond with my family? Questions kept piling up in my mind with no clear answers. I knew that, at some point, I would have to face that long-overdue conversation with my mother, the one where I would tell her everything I had been holding in for years. But I didn't know if I was ready for it. In the meantime, I kept living my life, moving forward step by step, not knowing exactly where this new path I had chosen would lead me. The days passed with the same routine, though something inside me was no longer the same. I had gotten used to the idea of setting boundaries, but I also started noticing how this affected the dynamics with my family. My mother called less, as if sensing my distance made her feel less confident about asking me for favors. My brother, on the other hand, seemed annoyed by my lack of availability. I noticed it in his tone, in the way he casually mentioned how I was not the same as before. I didn't respond to those comments. Not because I had nothing to say, but because deep down I knew it wasn't worth justifying myself. I had spent too much time trying to fit into a role I no longer wanted to play. However, with every interaction, I wondered if I was doing the right thing or if, in some way, I was allowing the gap between us to become irreparable. One day, while scrolling through social media, I saw a photo of my family at a dinner. They all looked happy, enjoying the occasion. They hadn't invited me. I didn't feel angry, but there was a slight knot in my throat. I wondered if this was the price of choosing to prioritize myself, being on the outside, watching from a distance. Clara, my friend, noticed my mood and suggested we go out to clear my mind. I accepted without hesitation. During our outing, she asked me if I missed my family. I don't know, I answered honestly. I miss the idea of what it could have been, but not what it actually is. That night, when I got home, I thought about what I had said. Did I really want to get something back, or was I just trying to fill a void? What exactly was I expecting from my mother? For a long time, I had longed for her to notice the difference in treatment, to one day realize how unfair she had been to me. But maybe that expectation was only causing me more unnecessary pain. I decided to focus on my own life. If my family didn't seek out my presence, I wouldn't insist on being part of something where I wasn't considered. I started enjoying my free time, focusing on my goals and surrounding myself with people who truly wanted to share moments with me. But life has a strange way of testing our decisions. A month later, I received a message from my mother. It wasn't an invitation, nor an apology, not even a question about how I was doing. It was a simple, "Can you come? I need to talk to you." The message caught me by surprise. I hesitated to respond right away. Was this just an excuse to ask for a favor? Or did she really want to talk about the distance that had grown between us? I stared at the screen for several minutes, unsure of what to do. Finally, I typed a simple, "Okay, I'll come in the afternoon." The drive to her house felt longer than usual. I didn't know what to expect, and that made me nervous. When I arrived, I found my mother in the living room with an expression I couldn't immediately decipher. She didn't seem angry, but she wasn't entirely at ease either. "You've distanced yourself a lot," she said after a moment of silence. There was no reproach in her voice, but something that resembled discomfort. "I feel like you don't reach out to me like before." I didn't know whether to laugh or be surprised. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything I had been holding in, to make her see that I had never distanced myself out of spite, but because I had felt ignored for too long. But I didn't. Instead, I simply said, "I feel like I was never a priority." My mother frowned, clearly confused. "What do you mean? I've always loved you." "It's not about love," I replied calmly. "It's about how you've made me feel." Conversation was long, filled with pauses and moments where neither of us knew how to continue. My mother didn't seem to fully understand my perspective, but at least she was listening. It was the first time in a long time that we spoke without her dismissing my feelings. However, the talk didn't end with a big change or a resolution. There were no deep apologies, no promises that things would be different. Only silence remained between us, as if we were both trying to process what had just been said. When I left her house, I felt strangely light. Not because everything had been solved, but because, at least, I had finally said out loud what I had been holding in for so long. I knew this wasn't the end of the story, that there was still much left unresolved. But at least for the first time in a long time, I felt like something had shifted. The silence between my mother and me became a persistent echo in the days that followed. Although we had finally talked about what had hurt me, the conversation hadn't brought the change I had once hoped for. There was no dramatic shift in our relationship, no apology that fixed everything. But something inside me had changed. For the first time in a long time, I no longer felt the need to convince her of anything. I realized that I had spent too much time trying to obtain something that perhaps was never meant for me. For years, I had waited for recognition, for a gesture that would make me feel valued, without noticing that holding on to that hope had only caused me frustration. Now I understood that I didn't need to keep searching for that validation. Life went on, and I had the right to live it without being trapped in the need to receive something that could never be given. Months passed, and my relationship with my family adopted a new dynamic. My mother and I spoke from time to time, but the conversations were superficial. I no longer tried to force a closeness that didn't flow naturally. My brother also seemed to accept my distance without much issue, and my sister simply went on with her life as if she had never noticed the change. During this time, I focused on myself like never before, finishing my course, traveling again on my own, and dedicating myself to activities I truly enjoyed made me realize that I had been wasting energy trying to fit into a space that was never designed for me. I surrounded myself with people who valued and understood me without me having to demand it. I built an environment where I felt at peace. One day, while walking through the city, I received a message from my mother. It wasn't an invitation or a request, just a simple "I hope you're doing well." I stopped for a moment before responding. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just calm. I replied with the same neutrality. "I'm doing well, thanks. I hope you are too." There was nothing more after that, but I didn't need anything else. Over time, I stopped expecting anything more. There was no resentment in my decision to keep my distance, only acceptance. I understood that some relationships can't be what we want them to be, and that was okay. Peace didn't come from getting what I wanted, but from learning to let go of what was never in my hands. In the end, I found the freedom I had been searching for, not in the unconditional love of my family, but in the certainty that I was enough, with or without them. And that, in the end, was all I needed to move forward.